Welcome into Hittin Hard with Jon Chuckery here on Locked On Sports Atlanta. Today on the show, John Collins calls out the crowd post-game, consistently inconsistent, and is Lukas Van Ness an answer at number 8 for the Falcons? All next, Hittin Hard with Jon Chuckery, Locked On Sports Atlanta.
This is Hittin Hard with Jon Chuckery, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it starts now.
Hittin Hard is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. You can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. You can get the latest episodes of Hittin Hard as soon as they become available. Roku and Amazon Fire are also a couple of platforms you can check us out on, and then give me a follow on my personal Twitter page at JMCH316. Well, John Collins had some interesting comments following the Golden State Warriors game on Friday, where he said, I got to hold you accountable, ATL. Never be out-cheered by another team. Now, look, I was in the building on Friday night. We had our station night out and was at the game. And, look, have I heard more vociferous crowds, or have I heard a crowd that was louder for the other team over the years? Yeah, whether it was Kobe, whether it was LeBron at times, I've heard that building be louder for the other teams. Now, I understand John Collins' point, because I was doing some pregame stuff and I was actually down on the court, and I could get a sense of what the crowd was feeling. And when Steph and Clay were warming up and they were just hitting some buckets and warm up and stuff like that, there was a loud, voiced crowd that was there in the building, but it wasn't anything ridiculous. Now, again, I understand what John was trying to say when he says, don't be out cheered by another team. Look, that building was a sellout. That building is loud for the Hawks when you've got a good team coming in there. But this has always been a theme for Atlanta, right? There's always a section of fans. This is true for the Hawks. This is true for the Atlanta Falcons, that when a certain team comes in, that they're going to have certainly a strong fan contingent at the games. The Golden State Warriors are one of those teams. And the reason being that they are one of the most successful, if not the single most successful franchise over the last decade plus in the NBA. And they have some superstar talent, right? Steph Curry is one of the most popular players in the NBA. Klay Thompson is a very popular player. They're a very good organization, top to bottom, and obviously they've been immensely successful. But I don't have a problem with John Collins kind of saying, hey, we got to rally the troops here. And that was a really good win on Friday night. Like, that was we talked about this last week, that there were no excuses for the Atlanta Hawks, no excuses going into that game. The Golden State Warriors are dreadful on the road. I think they're 7-28 now on the road. And you didn't have Draymond Green out there. You had 3 days off. You had to protect your home court. You had to find a way to win that game no matter what. And the Hawks took care of business. Trae Young had a big steal late in that game, and that kind of sealed the victory. But, that was a really back-and-forth game. The Golden State Warriors were up, I think, 16-4 early on. The Hawks fought their way back. They had a big lead. Then Golden State came back, and they tied it up, took the lead. It was back and forth all the way through. But that was a good win. And John Collins did play really well on Friday night. And I do think that there was a lot of emotion in a game like that. This was an important game for the Atlanta Hawks to win. Obviously, it's in front of, even though their record is not very good on the road, it's still in front of a top-tier opponent on your home court. And I think he just wanted the crowd to, bow up a little bit and out-cheer the opposing team. I get that. And normally that's not necessarily a problem for the Atlanta Hawks, even when they've been very bad and not been a very good franchise and different things like that. When they've been sort of mediocre, but usually that crowd has been very much into games over the last few years for this Hawks team. So while I didn't have a problem with it, and I understand where he's coming from, I have definitely been in that building over the years where that home crowd has been drowned out by the likes of, especially when Kobe Bryant was playing for the Lakers, and that was their one and only shot when they would come to Atlanta, right? I mean, when you played the Lakers, you only had 2 games against them and you only had 1 home game against them. And that crowd would be about like half Lakers fans. Now, again, the Hawks weren't always very good in those years, but certainly when stars have come into the building for the Atlanta Hawks, and again, even for the Atlanta Falcons, when you've had the top teams, the Dallas Cowboys, the New England Patriots, you get a strong contingent of fans. I was at the 49ers game earlier this year. You have a really good section of 49ers fans. Atlanta's a very transplant city. I get rooting for the home team, but there are a lot of loyalties for folks around this town. But certainly that crowd has been behind the Hawks, even though the Hawks haven't delivered a lot of nights, even though the Hawks have kind of been very mediocre over the last few years. The home crowd has pretty much delivered night in, night out for this team. But again, an emotional win. Jon played really well. It's an emotional time. The Hawks need every victory that they can get, and we'll talk about what else happened over the weekend, but they need every victory that they can get. But certainly this is a franchise that you have to understand that at times in Atlanta that there are opposing forces and there are sections of fans that are always going to root for some of the other stars, for some of the other franchises. It's just the nature of the business. And I promise you that when the Warriors travel around, they are must-watch basketball, right? Back when LeBron was playing at his height, when you had Miami, that's must-watch basketball. Those games are always going to be sellouts, and they're going to be raucous crowds, both for the home team and for when Golden State or Miami would come into town. It's just the nature of the NBA and even to a certain degree the NFL. So I don't have a problem with what John Collins said, but certainly, look, it happens in Atlanta, but it was still a really good home crowd. All right, let's talk about our friends over at Built Bar at FanDuel, should say. As March Madness is here, when you go for new customers over to FanDuel.com, you can claim your no-sweat first bet where you can get as much as $1,000 in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. You can download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, super easy to use. You can bet on everything from money lines to point spreads to the number of three-point shots that are made, everything in between. Plus, FanDuel lets you combine your bets for a bigger chance at a same-game parlay for a bigger payout on them. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel.com/LOCKEDON and claim your no-sweat first bet where you can get as much as $1,000 in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get all of the details there, but claim your no-sweat first bet for a chance at $1,000 if your first bet doesn't win. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook betting partner of the NBA. Well, so Friday night was the good night for the Atlanta Hawks. And then yesterday afternoon, okay? So let's see. The Hawks scored 83 points. Let me repeat that. The Hawks scored 83 points in the first half yesterday. Check. Good. The Hawks were up by 22 in the first half. Check. All good. The Hawks at one point had a 24-point lead in the game. Check 3. And then what ended up happening? one of the epic collapses all time for the Atlanta Hawks. The Hawks not only didn't win, they lost by 8 points in a game where they laid the ultimate egg of all eggs to the last place team in the Western Conference. Not like it was Golden State or Denver or Memphis. No. I mean, DeJounte Murray, in his return to San Antonio, they lost a 24-point lead. And then also they got beat by 8 to the last place team in the Western Conference. And this is what we talk about all of the time with this Hawks franchise. You know, if you think that just firing Nate is the solution to all of the Hawks' problems, and I've said this consistently, okay, and you're not going to like this, but this is the freaking truth, is that it was Nate's fault, Trey's fault, John's fault, DeJounte's fault, Colin's fault, Capella's fault. It's Lauren Jabara's fault. It's the guy in section 214 selling beers. It's the popcorn vendor's fault. It's the guy who's sweeping the floor. Every single person who has an entity that is associated with the Atlanta Hawks, it's all of their fault. And now you see this all come to fruition. This is not just a Nate problem. This is top to bottom. Your front office, everything top to. Let me give you kind of a recap here of what the week was for the Atlanta Hawks. So let's start with last Saturday night against the Boston Celtics. So you did a good job of beating the Washington Wizards in 2 home games that were played. And then you came home against the Boston Celtics. And this was the second night of a back-to-back, where the Hawks are, I believe, 2-7 in back-to-back games on the season, okay? So you pretty much figured that coming in to play one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference, coming into a back-to-back where you have not played well, even though you were home, that was going to be a tough win. So you lost 134-125. You didn't play a lot of great defense in that game. Okay, that's a consistent theme for the Atlanta Hawks. But then you come on Monday the 13th, and you're at home. You had a day off. You rested up at home, okay? Minnesota is coming into your building, and you feel like, okay, we can get back on track here with a home victory, and we got to protect home court. Even though we lost to Boston on Saturday, that was a tough scenario, okay? You have Minnesota coming in. You lose 136-115. You got blown off your home court. And you figure, okay, you know, maybe the Hawks just needed some rest. They played 3 games in 4 days. And okay, you know, maybe some excuse making, but maybe the Hawks just needed some rest when all was said and done. So you get blown out on your home court against Minnesota. Then you have a few days off. In fact, I think the Hawks had 1 full legitimate day off where they didn't practice or shoot around or anything. So you had Monday night against Minnesota. Then you didn't play again until Friday against Golden State. And you find a way to beat Golden State 127-119. You didn't play all that bad defensively. John Collins had a big night exposing no Draymond Green on the front court. So you took care of your business against Golden State, which you had to win that game. And then you turn around, and a couple of days later, you go down and say, okay, maybe we can start to figure some things out here. And you go down to San Antonio, play the worst team in the Western Conference, and you lose after blowing a 24-point lead. You not only lose, but you lose 126-118, where the Hawks scored 35 points in the second half after they scored 83 points in the first half, and they scored 35 the entire second half. And this is the Dow Jones nature of what this team is and what this roster is. So we can blame all the coaches and all that kind of stuff. And I think that what's Quin Snyder's record now? I think he's like 5-9 or 5-8 or 4-8 or something like that. Like it's still the same problems. They're still not a very good team defensively. They still get in these lulls and stuff like that. So you lose to Boston, you get blown out by Minnesota, a big win against the defending champions, and then you blow a 24-point lead. Now, how does all that happen? How does a good team, a team that honestly, and John Collins said this after the game on Friday night, he said, look, our team can play with anybody when they want to. Our team can play with anybody. So how do you get blown out by Minnesota? You handle your business against Golden State, and you lose a 24-point lead where you score 35 points in the second half against the worst team in the Western Conference. Consistently inconsistent. And that has been the theme for this team. No matter how well Trey plays, no matter how well DeJounte Murray plays, or Collins or Capella, at the end of the day, they're a 500 team. And this is why, and I keep circling back to the same narrative and the same mantra over and over again. This is why Tony Ressler isn't willing to dump a bunch of money into going into the luxury tax. Why? And I agree with him. Why? If you're not better than a 500 team, listen, adding a Kevin Huerter or somebody like that isn't going to change the dynamic of what this team is. You could add a player here and a player there and things like that. It's not going to change the overall dynamic of what this team is. There's some fundamental flaw with this basketball team that shows up night in, night out, that you never know what kind of game that you're going to get. Defending, I mean, I really do think that they play up to their competition and they play down to their competition. Because when you lose to Minnesota, and Minnesota's not a bad team, but certainly you should beat Minnesota on your home court. You certainly shouldn't get run by 21 on your home court to Minnesota. And then you lose to the worst team in the Western Conference. They play up and down to what their competition is. They played pretty well against the Celtics. They couldn't stop them. They couldn't stop them on defense in that game last Saturday. And then you did a pretty good job against the Warriors. But it's just so maddening to watch this team. And what have we said consistently on this podcast? They are going to be fortunate just to hang on to the 8th seed. This idea of them being a 6th seed and all, that's bunk. Like that's falderall. Like that's not going to happen. This team is lucky to be hanging on to the 8th seed. And they've had some help. And at times they've beaten a few teams that are right around them. But this team is 500 for a reason. They're not a great defensive team. They get wildly inconsistent with their three-point shooting. And they just have so many flaws that simply changing the coach wasn't going to solve all of the issues. Again, they didn't get that boost that when they fired Lloyd Pierce and Nate McMillan took over, they didn't get that immediate boost. This team is what it is. And it's going to be very interesting. And we've talked a lot about this, about what do you do moving forward? What do you do? Do you gut this thing? Do you change up a piece here or there? You're going to build around Trey Young. I think you keep DeJounte Murray until the trade deadline. If you can't re-sign him or sign him to a new contract or whatever, and they'll roll with some of their guys, but I think that there are going to be pieces that are moved and changed, whether that's Capella or Hunter or Collins. But this group isn't figuring it out. And I don't think that Quin Snyder with an off season and this, that, and the other is going to solve everything for this team. But it's consistently inconsistent how poor that this team plays on a night in, night out basis. All right, let's talk about our friends over at Built Bar. Listen, the March Madness tournament taking place, right? We're in the Sweet 16. Well, Built has got you covered with the Built March Madness bracket. You go to BuiltMarchMadness.com and vote for your favorite bar or puff at BuiltMarchMadness.com. So, listen, we've got a deal for you. You put your vote in at BuiltMarchMadness.com. Vote for your favorite bar or puff, and you will be entered in to a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners will get a free box of Built Bars. 50 listeners to our show will get a free box of Built Bars. And not only that, but one lucky fan from Locked On will win a 12-month subscription to have the best Built Bars delivered monthly straight to your doors. So head to BuiltMarchMadness.com, vote for your favorite bar or puff today, and you'll be entered for a chance to win a free box of Built, and you'll be entered for one 12-month subscription that we're going to give to our fans over at Locked On. Run to BuiltMarchMadness.com, vote for your favorite bar or puff. Every day you can vote in March. Hop in and support your pick. So is Lukas Van Ness an answer for the Atlanta Falcons at number 8? He's been one of the guys that has been mocked potentially at 8. Several edge players, right? Miles Murphy, Nolan Smith, if Jalen Carter fell, interior guy, right? I mean, there's a lot of defensive names that are being mocked to the Atlanta Falcons, including corners, Devin Witherspoon. We've talked about all that, okay? But is Lukas Van Ness a potential answer? So Van Ness is a kid. He's a big physical specimen, 6'5", 264, defensive end out of Iowa. Here's the thing that's very interesting is that Lukas Van Ness is not only just a 2-year player, but Lukas Van Ness has never started in college. Now, think about that. He's never started in college. Now, that doesn't completely knock him or anything like that, but he's never started in college. In fact, last year, he was a total rotational player, which, again, I'm looking for a lockdown starter on my defensive line, right? When it comes to edge and all that, I'm looking for a guy who's going to play 17 games starting off as. So I feel like that if they draft Lukas Van Ness at 8, am I going to see him starting in week 1? Am I going to see him on the field? Arnold Ebiketie didn't start. And Lukas Van Ness is a guy who's not started in college. Now, think about that. Now, he's had 13 sacks over the last couple of years, and he is definitely a physical specimen. But when you look at a Van Ness, okay, he's obviously potentially grades out to have a high ceiling. But how big is his floor at number 8? And you really will have to coach up and mold him and form him where he's got some, again, folks that have watched his tape say that it's inconsistent. He flashes at times and he shows you some moments, but he's consistently not there play in, play out. And if you look, he had no sacks against Michigan or Ohio State last year. Half of his sacks last year came against Rutgers, Nevada, and South Dakota State. That's 3 of his 6 sacks from last year. But the tape says that, and again, maybe this is from a lack of starting and playing more, but the tape says is that he flashes, but doesn't consistently go things, he's consistently not there play after play after play. And, the scouting report is, as a run defender, he can be thrown off balance and can be caught with his eyes in the backfield where he misses certain blocks and things like that. So is Lukas Van Ness at the end of the day a guy that I want at number 8? I like his ceiling, but I just think that we need a player who can come in and make an impact from day one and can start day one and be productive on day one. Like, we can't get into this monkeying around with prospects and ceilings and all this kind of stuff. I got to have a guy that produces day one. Because right now, where am I finding 38 sacks? Now, we'll break this all down after the draft and all this kind of stuff, but where am I finding 38, 40 sacks? Ellis is a guy, Caden Ellis, the guy that they picked up in free agency from the Saints. Okay, is he the 7-sack guy that he was in New Orleans last year? Or is he the guy that for 3 years before that had 1 sack? Which guy is he? He's the Caleb McGarry of defensive linemen, right? He's had 1 really good season amongst 4 mediocre against 3 bad seasons. So I like Lukas Van Ness as a player, but I just don't think that the Falcons can monkey around and get a guy who's just a project and who probably fits on a team where he doesn't have to be the starter, where he can come in and play a rotational role. Do I think Lukas Van Ness is a first-round talent? Yes. Would I be disgusted or just frustrated beyond all belief if Lukas Van Ness is the pick for the Atlanta Falcons at 8? No, but I think that there are guys that are more polished, more accomplished, and could come in and start day one, like a Miles Murphy or a Tyree Wilson. There are guys that I think that could be more polished to come in and start day one for this team. And that's what I'm looking for. I need a guy who can come in and be productive day one, not work his way into a rotation, not be a guy who maybe could start at the end of the year. Even Ebiketie only made the one start, and that was frustrating because I've talked about that all last year. I need him to start more. I need Ebiketie to have started more. Well, I need a guy at 8 that comes in and can be a game wrecker on the defensive line, and especially when it's most likely that 4 quarterbacks will be, of the first 7 picks before the Falcons get to 8, 4 quarterbacks will probably be taken. That only leaves 3 guys. And it's going to be Will Anderson is going to be one of the guys that's going to be taken. He's not going to fall to 8. So if that's 4 quarterbacks and Will Anderson, then you know that the Falcons should have their pick of a lot of really good defensive linemen, whether that's Murphy, Tyrese Wilson, Lukas Van Ness, Nolan Smith, Jalen Carr, whatever. More than just the name on the back of the jersey, there's going to be a plethora of guys to pick from at the 8th spot. That's why I don't think the Falcons have to trade up, down, sideways, whatever like that. Would Lukas Van Ness be my first choice at number 8? No. Is he kind of a project that could work into a rotation? Yes. But I don't think that that's what the Falcons need right now. I don't think that's what the Falcons need in this draft. They've got to get a guy that's ready to be a starter from day one and be productive from day one. All right, thank you so much for making Hittin' Hard with Jon Chuckery your first listen every day. Make sure you make Locked On Sports Today your second listen. Biggest stories of the day, instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day available Odyssey, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts from. You can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can always get Hittin' Hard with Jon Chuckery as soon as episodes are available. We also ask you to check out Roku and Amazon Fire. That's 2 more platforms to follow all of our content on, and then give me a follow on my personal Twitter page. That would be at JMCH316. Back with you tomorrow. This has been Hittin' Hard with Jon Chuckery, Locked On Sports Atlanta.